Vampire the Masquerade is one of those games you always see in a Steam sale. You think about buying it, but ultimately after snooping around its store page you either said you'd buy it in the next sale or you bought it and forget you own it. It turns out you are far more familiar with this game than you ever thought. For a lack of a better way to describe it, VTM is basically New Vegas or Skyrim but based on vampire fiction and it's with a far more limited open world. The game starts with you either answering questions to decide what race you play as, or you can just decide what you want. I answered the questions and was given a nice variety to play as. Dare that imply whatever you want about me. Each race is essentially its own class. One's really good at persuasion, one's good at combat, another is amazing at stealth and so on. What race you play as actually has an impact on the way the world reacts to you and how you play. As time went on, I actually became extremely hostile to almost everyone as I got so tired of people commenting on my grotesque appearance. Had I played any other race, I wouldn't have encountered this or encountered something entirely different. Some NPCs would even run away in fear when I tried to talk to them, which only made me want to play through a second time as another race just to hear what they had to say. Gameplay is split into two parts, one part interaction with the world and one part combat. The interaction is all stuff most of you watching this have already done, talking to NPCs to get quests, info, equipment, as well as persuasion, haggling and seduction checks based on the skills you have. Combat is split into three types, melee with weapons, melee where you just punch people, and then there's guns. They all have their advantages and disadvantages, such as guns being less effective on kindred and melee not being too great on humans. In my experience it didn't really matter so much. I just used my fire axe to cut everything and never felt like I needed to swap, though I can see it being a bigger deal on harder difficulties. The combat isn't going to blow you away, it does its job efficiently. Both melee types force you into a third person camera which makes short range weapons hard to use, whilst guns can go both third or first person. Though there's really no reason to ever use third person when using guns, but that's a running theme with this type of RPG. The story kinda throws you into the deep end and confuses the hell out of you right off the bat. You and another kindred are kidnapped and put on display in front of other kindred so they can witness the execution of both of you. After the other person, who you very quickly learn was your sire, is executed, characters stand up in protest, saving your life and unknown to you at the time, turning you into the pawn in the middle of a faction war. The war itself is all based around the way kindred should live their life, mainly so their existence doesn't become common knowledge as they are already being hunted by vampire hunters. Some feel restrictions and laws should be in place like the Masquerade, which is pretty much just a 5 strikes and your head is going to be removed from your shoulders deal. It actually applies to gameplay as well. If you are caught doing supernatural or just generally vampire-ish things in public, that is a strike against you. Get 5? It's game over. You really have to mess up majorly for that to happen, as the game is pretty forgiving when it comes to that, so it's never as big of a deal as the game tries to make you believe. Anyway, another faction just wants to live free and deal with the kindred that shine a spotlight on them when they need to. These are the two factions that are most important to the plot. There are others, but they're not really worth bringing up. It's more enjoyable to discover their gimmicks for yourself. For the purposes of the review, I'd have to say that the major flaws I see in the game are first off, it's aged. The game is 10 years old now and it really shows in parts. There's little things the game has you do that wouldn't fly today, such as having platforming sections in games that aren't capable of doing it well. There was one instance of this in the game that made me so angry playing it that it was either I used console commands to no-clip past it, or I uninstalled the game. Secondly, the game was rushed out the door. Activision really put pressure on them to release, and as such the game released in an extremely buggy, almost unplayable state. Luckily, PC Gaming came to the rescue and fans that saw potential in the game have been patching, fixing and adding content to the game for the past 10 years. Now whilst they've done an excellent job, anytime I get stuck in the game I can never figure out if it's a bug or if I'm doing something wrong, which is a horrible feeling. Wrapping up, Vampire the Masquerade is an extremely enjoyable RPG that is a great example of all the best parts of PC gaming. It's the first piece of vampire media that ever got me interested in other vampire fiction. When the next Steam sale rolls around, keep an eye out for this, it's worth your money. Just make sure you grab the fan packages and keep some console commands handy. This doesn't really have anything to do with the review, but playing this I kept thinking what happened to the genre of RPG. Whilst millions of people love New Vegas and Skyrim, and I'll probably catch some heat for this, they don't offer anything that substantial over what VTM produced. I can't help but wonder, had Activision not fired the developers, had they made another game that improved on what they made previously, would Skyrim and New Vegas have been much more evolved games? Almost every genre has progressed massively over the past 10 years, so has this genre just become stagnant, or is it just not open to innovation? Anyway, thanks for watching the review. If I said anything hugely wrong, drop a comment. Maybe I can get an annotation put in that corrects it, and be sure to watch the rest of Locke's month of horror reviews.